Okay, so today we're going to be talking about these things. First of all, who am I and why the hell should you be listening to me? Secondly, what's the difference between AWACS and LAWCS? SLR's AWACS, LAWCS and feasibility study for K2K, which is a development corridor in Randwick Council in Sydney. Council's LAWCS guidelines and how they're applied in practice, what the challenges were, and then a conclusion. So I'm a technical director at SLR. I've been in the waste industry a long time. I started out at the New South Wales Recycling Advisory Unit, and when the EPA was formed, I was there on day one. We were all assumed into the EPA. I worked for a number of waste contractors, particularly Pacific Waste Management, which over a number of years has morphed into Veolia, who you'd be familiar with. I've been a consultant most of that time for 30 years, initially with Kinhill Engineers, and people who are old enough might remember Kinhill. And I was at GHD for 9 years, and I've been at SLR since 2018, and yes, I have lectured in waste management at the University of New South Wales. So I'm sure you're all sort of, if you're not familiar with vacuum systems, you've heard of them. Essentially, they collect waste and transport it at high speeds through underground pneumatic pipes or tubes. This is more or less what they look like, but if you want to see sort of a working, well, a model, NVAC, who is a supplier, has one out there in that other room, and it looks a bit like this, only in 3D with flashing lights and everything. And if you have any interest in this kind of thing, I suggest you go and have a look and have a chat to them. But you can see that there is several types of entrance points, so you can have chutes going down the middle of blocks of units. You can have public access areas, and then in this particular case, so this is an area-wide system, there's a central collection facility that could be located, some distance away, 1 kilometre or something like that. And the idea is that you don't need to have trucks going over the surface to get waste from these areas. And in Europe, where these systems are more common, where some places, for example in Scandinavia, have snow on the ground for most of the year, it's this kind of system that allows waste to be collected. It's also used in the Middle East, where you've got very large areas that have a lot of people in them. You can't have trucks necessarily operating across the surface. So there are two main kinds of vacuum systems. The area-wide collection system, this is where waste is sent to a fixed remote collection point like we saw in the diagram. It's compacted and transported for recovery or disposal using sort of normal hook bins and normal trucks. And then there's a local collection system where waste is held in underground tanks for collection by vehicles with automatic suction equipment, and you can see the two kinds here. So there is no central location here, it's just this outlet by the side of the road or somewhere near the edge of the network, and a truck comes and literally sucks the waste out of the containers under the ground. So those of you who are not familiar with Randwick City Council, it's a beachside council in Sydney's eastern suburbs, and that's where it's located. It's about 135,000 people, and one of the most interesting things about it is that there are more than 60% of its dwellings are multi-unit dwellings, which would make it one of the highest in Australia. And that sort of has a bit of an effect on why council was thinking about this kind of system. So council wanted to investigate the feasibility of an underground waste system in the Kensington to Kingsford Development Corridor, and it's shortened to K2K. This is a corridor along Anzac Parade, which is a major thoroughfare in southern Sydney. It has a light rail system going over the surface. There's a lot of strip shopping, high density residential is planned. It's near the University of New South Wales, so a lot of this residential is student accommodation and sort of boarding house type accommodation. Council wanted to reduce the number of bins on the streets, reduce the amount of litter that results from that, and reduce the number of collection vehicles that would be needed to collect these bins and increase recycling. So they appointed SLR to undertake a feasibility analysis of these two systems and whether or not either or both or none would work in this K2K corridor. So to cut a long story short, our conclusions were that the system was viable. Sites identified by council to accommodate a central collection station under an area-wide system were included in the analysis. There were two sites, one near Randwick Racecourse and another one down at Kingsford. However, due to the presence of the light rail, having to install pipes going under Anzac Parade meant that there was significantly high cost involved. So the AWACS, the area-wide system, was not viable for Kensington, but viable for Kingsford. Council, in the end, decided on a type of local area system. There would be no district network or docking stations like we saw in the picture. Instead, Council's vacuum collection vehicle would connect to outlets directly on the side of buildings. Now, this system has been used elsewhere, but it was not one that was tested or analysed by SLR in its feasibility study. So in order to bring this about, Council developed these LAWCS guidelines, and these were for new developments, so there's no retrofitting. Any new development in the K2K corridor would have to comply with these guidelines. 3 streams would be collected: garbage, recyclables and food. And the guidelines provide details on the tank type. So there are a couple of different kinds. So the tanks would be located somewhere in the basement of the building, and chutes would feed into them, and there would be one for each stream, one chute for each stream, and there could be more than one tank for each stream as well. So there are screw and non-screw tanks, so they have an internal auger. Or some could be horizontal and some are vertical. There are different sizes, anything from 1 to 5 cubic metres. They need to be located somewhere, so there's guidelines that talk about the location. It also talks about pipe work going from the tanks, how the bends should be designed, what clearance is required near the ceilings, what the power requirements were, the location of the docking station, somewhere either on the outside of the building or on the street, the vehicle dimensions and the clearance required in order to get it close to the building. And it also required, so anyone that was putting in a development application, having addressed these guidelines, needed to get endorsement by a supplier. Now, Council had 2 preferred suppliers: Airbin, which is a Danish company, and RVAC, which is based in Singapore and does some manufacturing in India. They could use their own supplier as well, and there are others. NVAC out there is one of them. But they needed to have run it past the supplier to say that the whole system is going to work fine from their point of view. So, in practice, we've done a couple of developments, prepared waste management plans for approval for a couple of these kinds of developments now. We are one of Council's preferred consultants for this kind of thing. And we found that in preparing a waste plan, it's very similar to a conventional waste plan for any new development. We get contacted by the developer who says, we're developing this block of flats, we need a waste management plan for approval. We enter into agreement with the developer to prepare the waste plan to Council satisfaction. So although Council might say, here are our preferred suppliers, we have no relationship with Council in that regard. And we provide advice on the tank sizes based on Council's residential waste allowances, so many litres per household per week. The docking station type and locations, there are a couple of different kinds of docking station and whereabouts it can go on the street or on the building. And then all the other relevant waste management requirements that are part of a normal waste management plan as well. And then we also make sure that the architects know about these guidelines, and they then need to design the building to take into account all the pipework and the tanks and all that are specified in the guidelines. And we also put the architects in touch with a preferred supplier, one of the two that council has preferred, and we also suggest others. If they want to talk to someone else, that's fine. We can tell them, give them INVAC's phone number, and there are others as well. The architects then prepare the drawings showing the system, where the tanks are going to be, where the pipework is going to be, where the docking station is going to be. Some of the suppliers will provide drawings that will then can be used by the architects in their own drawings. And then, based on those drawings, we prepare the waste management plan that addresses all the requirements that council has for this kind of development. Now, it wasn't without problems. There are a number of challenges in doing these waste plans. The first was that no collections were allowed on Anzac Parade. The presence of the light rail reduced the number of lanes, so typically it's six lanes, but the light rail goes down the middle, which means that if there is cars parked, there's only one lane of traffic, and in some places there's even less than that. So we couldn't have collection vehicles connecting to the building out on the main road because it's going to block traffic. That meant the collections had to be undertaken from rear lanes or side streets. There could be problems with the collection vehicle manoeuvring in side streets and in lanes because they're narrow. One of the other issues was that the collection vehicle could stand for significant periods of time to collect the streams, and one figure that was quoted was possibly 45 minutes. The collection vehicle could block the lane or side street for that period of time. There were some other issues as well. The suppliers, so Airbin and RVAC, were reluctant to provide free advice, as you might imagine. We dealt mainly with Airbin. They were quite forthcoming initially, but after a while their patience ran out. And unless there was some kind of agreement between the supplier and the developer, then they just were saying, well, look, I think we've given you enough free information, understandably. The docking station often had to be on public land, so how is that going to work? Who is responsible for that? Is it council, or is it the corporation that operates the block of units? There still needs to be storage space for bulky waste, because you can't put bulky waste through this kind of system. So that has to be stored and collected by a conventional vehicle. So in mixed-use developments, of which there are a number in this part of Randwick, there still needs to be space for retail waste. So in one of these buildings, we had shops down the bottom, just like this picture here, with residential above. Retailers couldn't use the vacuum system, so there had to be a bin room for them, or they were storing it on their own property, and bins had to be put out and collected by a contractor in the same way as they would be normally. So these were the kinds of issues that the developer needed to resolve. Some of them were for the developer, but some of them also were for council. I mean, it was council's system and council's vehicle, and council had to decide how collections would be undertaken where streets were blocked off, for example, in order to prevent access onto Anzac Parade. And I'm not sure that those things were resolved ultimately. So, in conclusion, there are two types of underground waste system: an area-wide system and a local area system. Our feasibility study for the K2K corridor found that the system was viable under certain conditions. Council decided on a variation of the local system to collect directly from properties. And they prepared these guidelines in order to assist developers, architects and consultants like us to comply with the system as they would require. In practice, it's similar to a conventional residential or mixed-use development waste plan. We provided advice on tank sizes and locations, docking station type and location. We directed the architects to the guidelines and put them in touch with system suppliers. The architects prepared the drawings and we prepared a waste management plan based on those drawings. The challenges were that there were issues with vehicle access and standing time. Storage and collection of bulky waste still had to be dealt with. Storage and collection of retail waste also still had to be dealt with. Suppliers won't provide free advice, and council still working through some of these issues. Now, the council officer who was driving this has retired, so it's not immediately clear whether council will continue with this kind of system. I hope they will, but there are still some issues to be resolved that are frustrating for people like me and for developers and architects to deal with. So.